A janitor's silent pain hides a secret that could destroy the man everyone fears most. Undercover billionaire Richard Hartwell spotted his janitor, Anna Thompson, with a dark bruise under her eye as she quietly worked the lobby. She moved with calm dignity, but her manager, Lucas Cross, berated her in front of employees, exploiting every small mistake. Whispers spread through the room, some sympathetic, some fearful, but no one understood the full story. Anna's injury was no accident, and Cross was hiding a secret far more dangerous than anyone imagined. From his hidden vantage, Richard realized the situation was far darker than it appeared. Every observation led to a shocking, life-altering truth. Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. He built this place to lift people up. But today, it feels like a cage. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall glass windows of Harborstone Industries, dust motes drifting in the light like old memories. Richard Hale, 63, stood near the lobby's wooden bench, his hand resting against its smooth armrest. Years ago, when he funded this building under another name, it was meant as a place of dignity. Work, yes, but also respect. A company where no one would feel small. Now, walking through its halls as nothing more than a consultant, he saw a place trembling under invisible weight. Conversations hushed when certain footsteps echoed. Smiles faded into blank stares. The air was not hopeful. It was heavy. Richard's gaze shifted. Anna Whitlow, the young janitor, moved quietly across the marble floor. Just 24, blonde hair tied neatly back, her uniform plain but carefully kept. She carried her mop bucket with both hands, though one sleeve was rolled higher than the other. That's when he saw it. The bruise. Her left eye, darkened at the edge, hidden poorly beneath thin powder. She didn't meet anyone's gaze. But there was no collapse in her posture, no slump of shame. She moved with small precision. Each sweep of her mop was deliberate, like she believed even in cleanliness there was honor. Richard's chest tightened. He had known men like her father, women like her mother, workers who believed that if you kept steady, if you endured, better days would come. She reminded him of why this place was built in the first place. He opened his mouth, almost to speak, but the sound of polished shoes striking marble interrupted him. The rhythm was sharp, commanding. Every head in the lobby turned. Daniel Cross, 47, strode in. The manager. His gray suit was pressed to perfection, tie knotted so tightly it seemed to choke him. His eyes scanned the room not with warmth, but with ownership, and the moment his gaze fell on Anna, the air grew colder. Richard felt it instantly. The contrast between her quiet resilience and his looming presence. Cross didn't need to raise his voice yet. His mere arrival bent the room's mood. Richard kept his hand still on the bench's armrest, his heart steady but wary. The ideal vision of Harborstone was fading, and he knew something dark was about to surface. Anna froze, mop in hand. Cross stepped closer. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted from silence to fear. Cross's shadow fell across Anna's bruised face, and Richard braced himself. The room was about to change. Anna gripped her mop. She bent to wring it, though the bucket was already dry. Anything to keep her hands occupied. She did not look up. "Miss Whitlow," Cross said, voice smooth, almost friendly. "Almost. Do you call this clean?" His polished shoe slid across the tile, leaving a faint streak where water had gathered. He lifted his toe and showed it to the room. "Is this the standard now? Sloppy floors? A reflection of your fine work?" The question was not meant for her. It was for the witnesses. For every clerk and assistant now pretending to shuffle papers at the reception desk. None dared to intervene. None dared to breathe too deeply. Anna's lips pressed together. She reached for the mop again, dipping it quickly, shoulders square. She said nothing. "Look at me." The command hung like a chain. Slowly, Anna raised her face. The bruise was there, visible beneath the pale cover of powder. Cross's gaze lingered on it, then sharpened into a cruel smirk. "Ah, that explains it. Rough night, was it? Perhaps your vision's been affected. That would account for this careless work." A few nervous coughs broke the silence, quickly suppressed. One woman at the front desk lowered her head, pretending to scribble notes. Richard felt heat rise in his chest. His knuckles whitened against the bench's armrest. He wanted to speak. to cut through the venom laced in Cross's tone. But he remained still, his role demanding patience, his disguise demanding silence. Anna swallowed. "I'll clean it again," she whispered. Her voice barely carried, but it was steady. "Do that," Cross said. He leaned closer, his words meant only for her, though Richard was near enough to hear. "And remember, mistakes have consequences. You wouldn't want another reminder." His eyes flicked to her bruise before turning away. The words sank heavy into the air. A warning. A claim. A private truth disguised as public correction. Cross straightened, smoothing his tie with deliberate ease. He cast one last look around the lobby, ensuring every eye had seen his dominance, then strode toward the elevator. The door slid shut. Only then did the employees exhale, as if surfacing from underwater. Richard remained frozen. Anna bent back to her mop, her silence more telling than any protest could be. The elevator chimed, and the lobby slowly stirred back to life. But Richard knew the bruise was no accident, and the fear here ran deeper than unwashed tiles. Anna kept her head bowed, mopping the same spot until the streak vanished. Richard watched. His jaw was set, but his hands remained folded, still playing the role of quiet observer. Then the side door creaked. Evelyn Carter, 71, shuffled in carrying a canvas tote bag filled with papers. Her uniform, light blue blouse and navy skirt, was pressed neatly but softened by age. Evelyn was no employee. She was a retired secretary who visited often, volunteering to sort documents for the archives. Everyone tolerated it. Her presence was gentle, unobtrusive. "Anna, dear." Evelyn's voice trembled as she approached. "You shouldn't overwork yourself. That I needs rest." Anna's shoulders tensed, but she quickly straightened. "I'm fine, Miss Carter. Just finishing this section." Her hand tightened on the mop handle. Richard noticed the way Evelyn looked at Anna, with concern deeper than casual kindness. It was the look of someone who had seen hardship before and recognized it again. Evelyn reached into her tote and pulled out a handkerchief, folded crisp and clean. She pressed it lightly against Anna's hand. "Cold water," she said softly. "It will help." Anna accepted it with a small nod, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the elevator doors, as though Cross might return at any moment. From the corner of the room, two clerks exchanged glances. Their expressions carried pity, but neither spoke. Richard could see it clearly now. Silence had become a shield here. Every kindness risked punishment. Evelyn leaned closer. "You don't have to bear it alone," she whispered. Anna forced a thin smile. "Truly, I'm all right." She tucked the handkerchief into her pocket and bent again to her work. It was then that the elevator doors opened. Cross returned, adjusting his cufflinks. His eyes swept the lobby, sharp as a blade. They landed on Evelyn, lingering far too long. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice clipped. "Your visits grow frequent. Tell me, are you here to volunteer or gossip?" The words struck with casual cruelty, but the implication was clear. Her kindness was unwelcome. Evelyn's lips pressed together, her dignity intact but fragile. "I sort papers," she replied. "Nothing more." Cross gave a cold smile, then turned away, but not before muttering, "Waste of time." Richard's heart tightened as he watched. In the small act of passing a handkerchief, Evelyn had drawn Cross's disdain. Yet, in that moment, Richard also recognized it. This friendship was a fragile spark of warmth in a dark room. The elevator doors closed again, but the impression lingered. Richard knew that this quiet bond between Anna and Evelyn would not go unnoticed for long. Anna moved quietly along the far wall, mop now set aside for a broom. Evelyn sat at the reception desk, sorting a stack of old invoices she had insisted on organizing. Her glasses slipped to the tip of her nose, but her hands moved steadily, sure of their purpose. The piece shattered with the sharp echo of Cross's voice. "Mrs. Carter." The room froze. Cross strode from his office door, a folder clutched in his hand. His tie was loosened, his irritation barely concealed. "These files," he barked, slamming the folder onto the counter in front of her. Pages splayed across the desk like scattered feathers. "They're out of order. You've misfiled entire weeks. Do you even understand the system?" Evelyn's hands trembled. She reached for the papers, her lips parting. I thought." "You thought?" Cross leaned closer, his shadow falling over her. "Your job is not to think. It is to follow instructions. Unless, of course, you've come here for charity." A murmur rippled through the clerks behind their desks. None dared step forward. Anna's broom clattered to the floor. She crossed the lobby quickly, her blonde hair slipping loose from its tie. She placed herself between Evelyn and Cross, shoulders squared, voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "Please," she said, "don't speak to her like that. She's helping, and she's doing it for free." The silence thickened. Richard's pulse quickened as he watched. For Anna, it was an open act of defiance. Cross's face tightened, the calm mask slipping. His voice rose. "Defending incompetence now, are we? Perhaps that explains the filth you call work." He pointed toward her bruise, eyes narrowing. "Or perhaps this is why no one takes you seriously." A few gasps broke the silence. Evelyn reached out as if to hold Anna's hand, but Anna stood firm. Her silence was no longer survival. It was resistance. Cross's face flushed. His volume climbed. "Do you think you have the right to lecture me? You're nothing but a cleaner. Nothing. And if you don't learn your place, I'll." His words were cut short by the sudden sound of papers spilling to the floor. Evelyn had tried to stand, her frail legs unsteady under the weight of the moment. The shock, the noise, the fury, it was too much. She staggered, one hand clutching her chest. "Evelyn!" Anna cried, reaching out just as the older woman collapsed to the ground. Chaos surged. Clerks scrambled from their desks. A secretary shouted for water. Richard rushed forward, kneeling beside Evelyn, his hand steady at her shoulder. Cross stepped back, stunned. For the first time, his authority looked fragile. Richard pressed his hand firmly against Evelyn's back, steadying her trembling breath. In that fragile moment, the lines of loyalty in the room began to shift. Evelyn's hand clutched at Richard's sleeve, her breath shallow, uneven. He guided her gently into the nearest chair, employees crowding in with nervous whispers. Anna knelt at her side, offering a paper cup of water. "Easy," Richard murmured, keeping his voice calm. His palm rested against Evelyn's trembling shoulder. "Breathe slowly. You're safe." The older woman nodded weakly, then lifted her eyes toward Anna. There was a mixture of gratitude and fear in them. Fear heavier than her fainting spell. "Water," Anna said quickly, rising to fetch more from the cooler. She moved fast, desperate to help, her blonde hair loose across her face. As soon as she turned away, Evelyn's grip on Richard's sleeve tightened. Her fingers dug in with surprising strength. She leaned closer, her lips trembling with words she seemed terrified to speak. "It was him," she whispered. Richard bent lower. "Who?" Her eyes darted toward the closed office door where Cross had retreated after the commotion. Her voice was barely audible, but the words carried weight heavier than stone. "Daniel Cross. He did that to her. The bruise. He struck her." Richard froze. For a moment, time seemed to stall. The noise of clerks rushing, phones ringing, Anna's hurried footsteps, everything dulled. His breath caught in his chest as the truth anchored itself. He looked into Evelyn's face. The fear there was real, trembling, raw. Not rumor. Not exaggeration. Truth. Anna returned, kneeling beside Evelyn with the cup. She pressed it gently into the older woman's hand. "Here, sip slowly." Her voice was kind, steady, as though nothing had been said. Richard's gaze lingered on her. The bruise beneath her eye. The silence she carried like armor. He saw it now. Each quiet moment, each bowed head. Not weakness, but survival. She wasn't enduring the workplace. She was enduring him. "Cross," Evelyn whispered again, too soft for Anna to hear. "You must stop him." Richard's throat tightened. His disguise, his role as silent observer, suddenly felt unbearable. But he held his stillness. He couldn't act yet. Not without proof. Not without precision. Anna's hand rested lightly against Evelyn's arm. "You'll be all right. Don't push yourself." Richard forced his breathing even. His eyes shifted toward the office door, now closed. Behind it, Daniel Cross remained unchallenged, his power intact. But Richard's mind was no longer clouded by doubt. He had seen the truth. He had heard it whispered. And he knew. This was no longer about company culture. It was about justice. Richard sat back slowly, eyes fixed on the office door. His mission had just changed, and there was no turning back. Anna guided Evelyn slowly toward the break room, offering her steady arm. Richard remained near the bench, still and unreadable. His eyes, however, never left the office door where Daniel Cross had vanished. Later, when the noise dulled and the lobby emptied, Richard slipped into a quiet corridor. Fluorescent lights buzzed above him, throwing pale shadows against the walls. He leaned against the cool plaster, drawing one long breath. Evelyn's words pressed against his chest. He struck her. The image replayed in his mind. Anna's bruise, her silence, Cross's smirk. Each piece fell into place like stones in a grave. Richard's jaw tightened. Harborstone had been built on a promise. His father, a machinist, once told him, "A workplace is a second home. If a man brings fear through the door, it ceases to be a home at all." Richard had carried that lesson his entire life. He had invested his fortune quietly here, believing he was planting dignity for future generations. Now that promise had been desecrated, not just by arrogance, not just by mismanagement, but by violence. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum of electricity in the corridor. Firing Cross would not be enough. A simple dismissal would leave Anna unprotected. It would leave Cross free, perhaps even rewarded elsewhere. No, this was not a matter of management. This was a matter of law. Richard opened his eyes. He thought of Evelyn's trembling grip, of Anna's refusal to complain, of the hush that fell whenever Cross entered a room. This was a kingdom of fear. To dismantle it, he would need more than suspicion. He would need proof. Irrefutable. In court, not just in whispers. And violence rarely sprang from nothing. Richard had learned that in business. A man does not strike unless he is cornered, unless he has something to protect, or something to hide. A quiet certainty formed in Richard's mind. Cross was not only cruel. He was desperate. And desperation left trails, financial irregularities, secret deals, debts unpaid. If Anna had seen too much, if she had stumbled on the truth, it would explain the bruise. Richard straightened, his decision solidified. The time for watching was over. The mission had begun. He would uncover Cross's hidden crime. He would gather evidence, piece by piece. And when the time came, he would not simply remove him. He would see him fall, publicly and permanently. Richard adjusted his tie, his face set. From this moment, he was no longer just a silent witness. He was a hunter, and Cross had already revealed his weakness. Richard lingered near the stairwell, coat folded over his arm, his posture casual, but his eyes fixed on the corridor beyond. Cross's office door opened. The manager stepped out, his suit jacket draped over one shoulder, tie loosened. His polished control from earlier seemed worn thin. He glanced both directions before slipping toward the rear exit, his pace quick, determined. Richard followed at a distance, silent as a shadow. Outside, the evening air pressed cool against the stone facade. Cross walked fast, heading not for his car, but toward the alley behind the loading dock. There, beneath the dim glow of a single security light, a man waited. He was tall, rough around the edges, dressed in a dark overcoat that looked too heavy for the season. His hands stayed buried in his pockets. Cross reached him, voice low but sharp. "I told you, give me time." The man shifted, his tone flat. "Time is gone. You owe. And men who owe me don't get second warnings." Richard leaned against the cold brick corner, listening. His pulse slowed, his training holding him steady. "I can cover it," Cross hissed. "The accounts, just a few more weeks. Everything's moving through the books. No one suspects." The man stepped closer, forcing Cross back against the wall. "No one suspects? Your girl does. The janitor. You think I didn't notice her watching? If she talks." Cross's face darkened, voice cracking like glass. "She won't. I made sure of it." The man studied him, then gave a humorless laugh. "You're a cornered animal, Daniel. Cornered men make mistakes. Don't make one with me." He shoved Cross lightly before walking into the darkness, his coat blending with the night. Cross straightened his tie with shaking hands, breathing hard. He muttered under his breath, words Richard barely caught. "I'll keep her quiet. I have to." The manager hurried back toward the lot, shoulders hunched, his confident gait replaced by something brittle. Richard stayed against the wall, eyes narrowing. The pieces connected now. Debt. Fraud. A violent man pressed by darker forces. Anna must have seen something, stumbled into a secret ledger, a call, a misfiled receipt. That discovery had earned her the bruise. Richard's resolve tightened like a knot pulled firm. Cross wasn't simply cruel, he was drowning, and desperate men dragged others down with them. Richard stepped back into the shadows, his mind sharpening. To stop Cross, he would need someone inside, an ally who could open the locked doors. The next morning arrived gray and damp. Richard entered with quiet steps, scanning faces the way a chess player studies the board. Everyone moved carefully, deliberately, eyes down, voices low. Fear still lingered in the air. He noticed Mark Ellison, 32, hunched at his desk near the filing cabinets. His shirt was always too loose, tie always a little uneven. Mark avoided Cross's gaze more than most, but when Anna passed by with her cart of cleaning supplies, Richard caught the flicker of sympathy in his eyes. A softness. Not pity, but respect. That was enough. Later, in the break room, Richard found him alone, stirring coffee. The room smelled of burnt toast and paper filters. Richard poured himself tea, let the silence stretch, then spoke in an even tone. Rough place to work. Mark gave a small, wary shrug. Depends who's watching. He glanced toward the door. Richard stirred his cup slowly. I've seen how you look out for her. Mark's hand froze on the spoon. His eyes narrowed slightly. Don't know what you mean. You do, Richard said softly, without accusation. You're careful, but you notice. That tells me something. Mark exhaled, leaning against the counter. His voice dropped. Notice gets people in trouble around here. Richard met his gaze steadily. And silence keeps people hurt. He let the words settle. I'm not asking you to shout. I'm asking you to help me see what's hidden. That's all. Mark's jaw tightened. He turned his cup in his hands, wrestling with the weight of choice. If he finds out. He won't, Richard interrupted, voice calm but firm. I've dealt with men like him before. They use fear to stay untouchable. But he's not untouchable. Not if someone inside helps me. And you know she doesn't deserve what he's done. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them. Mark's shoulders slumped as if a burden had been pressing for years. He looked down into his coffee, then back at Richard. What do you need? A small nod was Richard's only reply. The alliance had been made. Quietly, decisively. Anna entered a moment later, carrying a tray of cleaning bottles. She smiled faintly at Mark as she passed. He looked at her bruise, then away, the choice he had just made etched in his face. Richard sipped his tea slowly, his expression unreadable. With Mark beside him, he now had eyes and hands inside the fortress. The next move would be dangerous, but necessary. Richard sat in the waiting area, a newspaper open in his hands, though his eyes flicked often toward the far hall. Mark slipped past, carrying a small stack of folders. He gave the faintest nod, the signal. Cross had left for an off-site meeting. The office was empty. The window had opened. Richard folded his paper and rose. Calm steps carried him down the corridor, his pulse steady though sharpened. Mark trailed behind, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Cross's office door loomed ahead, mahogany polished to a false sheen. Mark fumbled a key from his pocket. His hand shook as he turned it, the lock clicking louder than it should. They entered quickly. The office smelled of leather polish and stale coffee. Papers lay stacked in neat towers across the desk, but Richard's eyes went straight to the cabinet in the corner. He moved with precision, opening drawers, scanning ledgers. Bottom, Mark whispered, pointing. Richard knelt. The lower drawer resisted, as if unused. When it slid open, he found folders marked with client names, receipts, and unfiled invoices. His fingers brushed across a thin red binder. Inside were transaction slips. Large sums moved quietly between accounts, all routed through shell companies. Embezzlement, Richard murmured. He snapped photographs with a discreet pocket camera, page after page, methodical and swift. Mark kept watch at the door, sweat beading at his temple. Hurry, he muttered. Richard slid the binder back, closed the drawer, and straightened the stacks as he'd found them. He checked the desk next, scanning quickly through email printouts. One caught his eye, Anna's name, scribbled in Cross's handwriting beside a note. Possible risk. Watch closely. He folded it carefully into his pocket. Proof of motive. Just then, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Mark's face blanched. He's back. Richard closed the drawer quietly, adjusted the chair's angle by memory, and gestured to the side door. They slipped into the adjoining supply closet just as the office door opened. Through a narrow crack, Richard saw Cross enter, muttering into his phone. I told you, the money's coming. Don't call me here again. He tossed his jacket onto the chair, pacing. His back turned. Richard held still, breath shallow, until at last Cross left again, his phone conversation drawing him down the hall. Only then did they emerge, careful, silent. Mark's hands shook as he closed the closet door. Richard placed a steady hand on his shoulder. We have what we need, he said quietly. The crime is clear. Now we need the assault. Mark exhaled shakily, but Richard's voice was calm, firm. The next step would not be papers. It would be a trap. They stopped near the rear office, where Cross often retreated to make private calls. Richard glanced at the door, then at Mark. This is the window. He'll be alone, distracted, and overconfident. That's when he slips. Mark swallowed. You're sure this will work? Richard's gaze was steady. We need him to speak. Careless words. Confession. That's all. The plan was precise. Cross's arrogance and anger were predictable. He couldn't resist venting, especially when he believed no one could hear. The recorder, tucked under a stack of manila folders, would capture his voice perfectly. Mark opened the office door slightly, enough to slide the recorder inside without notice. Richard followed, ensuring it sat angled toward Cross's usual chair. Every detail mattered. He adjusted the folders so they appeared untouched, just part of a routine office day. Cross's footsteps echoed down the corridor. He entered, tossing his jacket onto the chair with a careless flourish. His tie was crooked, sleeves rolled. Richard and Mark slipped out silently, pressing themselves against the wall just beyond the sight line. Cross muttered to himself as he fumbled with the desk drawers. If she knew, it would ruin everything. Richard's pulse remained steady. The trap was set. Every movement, every word, now relied on patience. Mark glanced at Richard. He's pacing too much. Richard shook his head slightly. Let him. Nervous energy makes people talk. Cross pulled out a set of papers, flipping through quickly. I had no choice. She saw the numbers. Couldn't risk it. Now she's handled. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost conspiratorial. I made sure she'd learn her place. Richard's grip on the wall tightened. This was it, the confirmation they needed. Cross admitted it aloud. The violent act, the motivation, all captured without confrontation. Richard gave Mark a subtle nod. The device was secure. Evidence undeniable. The hallway remained quiet. Only the faint hum of the office lights above them marked the passage of time. Richard exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain. We wait now? Patience. He'll fill in the rest himself. Mark leaned back against the wall, exhaling shakily. Feels too easy. Richard allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. Justice is rarely easy, but it's precise. That's enough. The trap was in place. All that remained was the waiting. The moment when Cross would unknowingly provide the final link between his hidden crime and his assault. Richard and Mark waited just beyond the corridor, hidden but attentive. Every footstep echoed too loudly in their minds. Each creak of floorboard a potential alarm. Inside, Cross leaned back in his chair, jacket draped over the desk, sleeves rolled. He dialed a number on his phone, muttering low at first. Richard's ears sharpened. Yes, I did what I had to, Cross said, voice tight with impatience. The janitor. She saw something she shouldn't have. I couldn't let it go. I made her pay just once. Richard's jaw clenched, but he remained still. The recorder under the stack of folders captured each word, each inflection of menace. There's no one else, Cross continued, pacing slowly now. Nobody would notice. But if she tells anyone, it's over. The transfers, the accounts, everything. I can't risk it. Mark's hand brushed against Richard's arm, subtle but anxious. Richard shook his head slightly. Let it run. Let him confirm every connection. Cross's tone hardened, almost a whisper of triumph. She's lucky. I only needed to scare her. One bruise, one warning. That's all. And now she knows her place. Richard's mind cataloged it. Motive, act, confession, everything on record. His pulse remained steady, each word slicing cleanly through the fog of uncertainty. Cross hung up, muttering to himself about paperwork and deadlines. He leaned back, satisfied, unaware of the device recording his every syllable. Richard glanced at Mark. It's done. We have it all. Mark exhaled, a mixture of relief and disbelief. All of it. The reason, the assault. Richard nodded once. Every detail we need. No ambiguity. No interpretation. Direct admission. The two men remained in silence, waiting until Cross left the office to check on other parts of the building. Then, quietly, they retrieved the recorder. Richard tapped it, confirming the files were intact. The weight lifted slightly from Richard's shoulders. After days of careful observation, careful patience, the final piece was in hand. All that remains, he said softly, is the next step. Public confrontation. Legal enforcement. Full accountability. Mark nodded, gripping the recorder like a lifeline. We can't fail now. Richard allowed a small, composed smile. We won't. Justice isn't about speed. It's about precision. With the confession secured, Richard turned toward the lobby, planning the methodical, public reckoning that would expose Cross completely and protect Anna. The next morning arrived quiet, almost ordinary. Yet Richard moved with purpose, aware that the day would end far differently than it had begun. In his private office, he made a series of deliberate phone calls. The first was to law enforcement. He provided them with the evidence, the embezzlement documents, the audio recording of Cross's confession, and a detailed account of the assault. He scheduled their arrival for a precise hour, ensuring that every step would coincide with the unfolding confrontation. Next, he called the corporate headquarters. His tone was calm, professional, but carried a weight impossible to ignore. He informed them of the situation, the danger Cross posed, and the plan to secure the building safely. They were to arrive promptly once law enforcement was on site, closing any avenues of escape or obstruction. Finally, Richard reached Mark. He briefed him quietly in the supply room, keeping his voice low but firm. Stick to the plan. Be alert, but don't interfere unless necessary. Timing is everything. Mark nodded, swallowing hard. He understood. With the calls complete, Richard took a long moment to review the evidence laid out before him on the desk. Folders neatly stacked, photographs labeled, the recorder tucked safely in a small case. Each piece was vital, each accounted for. Precision had been his ally from the start, and now it would secure justice. He adjusted his jacket, smoothing his sleeves. Today, he would enter the lobby not as the quiet observer, not as a silent consultant. Today, he would step into his role as guardian, the presence that would command attention and reclaim control. Richard glanced at the clock. Minutes ticked down, each one heightening the tension. He allowed himself a small exhale, grounding his thoughts. This was not spectacle. This was measured. Each action, each movement, would reinforce authority without chaos. Mark arrived, carrying the manila folders that would serve as a believable cover, just another routine delivery. Richard nodded to him, the silent signal that everything was in place. He paused, looking out over the lobby. Anna was at her station, calm, steady, unaware of the final steps being taken to secure her dignity and safety. Evelyn's soft smile from across the room reminded Richard why he had undertaken this mission, to protect those overlooked, underestimated, and silenced. Richard straightened one last time, the weight of preparation settling into a quiet confidence. Soon, he would re-enter the lobby in full presence, ready to confront Cross and bring the situation to its inevitable reckoning. Cross moved through the space as usual, tie slightly crooked, polished shoes tapping against the tile. He carried himself with the same arrogant certainty, glancing over Anna as she cleaned a streak of floor near the corner desk. He smirked slightly, thinking she remained entirely under his control. Anna's hands worked steadily, her posture upright, her eyes focused on her task. She had returned to the rhythm of the lobby as if nothing had happened, but the faint bruising beneath her left eye was visible to those who looked carefully. No one dared comment, and she said nothing. Her dignity was quiet but undeniable. Richard entered through the side doors, moving at a measured pace. His coat hung neatly, his tie straight. He chose his position deliberately, at the intersection of the main walkway and reception, where he could observe everything and be seen in turn. Mark lingered discreetly near the supply closet, keeping an eye on the office door. He gave Richard a subtle nod, confirming that all preparations had been carried out flawlessly. The recorder was in place, law enforcement and corporate officials were on schedule, and the room itself held the usual pattern of calm that Cross trusted implicitly. Cross, unaware, approached the desk where Anna worked. His tone was casual, almost dismissive. "Make sure that area is spotless. I don't want excuses." Anna nodded slightly, eyes calm, returning to her task without a word. Richard observed, noting the predictable arrogance in Cross's body language, the way he assumed compliance without pause. A few clerks glanced nervously toward Richard, sensing his presence but not understanding its weight. Their tension shifted subtly. Hope flickered, unspoken but present. Richard caught Anna's eye briefly. She acknowledged him with a slight tilt of her head, quiet recognition passing between them. No words were necessary. They understood the rhythm, the strategy. Cross straightened after issuing his command, unaware that the next steps had been carefully staged. He began to walk back toward his office, brushing past the evidence he had left exposed in his own arrogance. Richard stood tall, adjusting his jacket. Every detail was in place. The moment of revelation, of justice, was approaching. Cross's confidence was about to meet its inevitable reckoning. Richard stepped forward, clearing his throat lightly. Cross paused mid-step, glancing back with a faint frown, annoyance flickering across his face. All eyes turned toward Richard. Clerks, customers, Anna, even Evelyn watching from the reception desk, all sensed a shift in energy, though none yet understood its magnitude. Richard raised his hand slightly, tapping the edge of a glass partition to draw attention. Silence fell like a soft curtain. "My name is Richard Hartwell," he began, voice calm, precise. "I have been overseeing Harborstone under a different guise. Today, that changes." Cross's eyes widened, disbelief mixing with suspicion. His smirk faltered. The casual control he had wielded over the space wavered, as if a shadow had passed over the sunlight he relied upon. "I am the owner and guardian of this company," Richard continued. "I have been watching, waiting, ensuring that what is here, the integrity, the dignity, the work, is protected. And I have seen actions that betray every principle upon which this institution was founded." The employees murmured quietly, glancing at one another. For the first time, they sensed that the rules had shifted. The man they feared was no longer untouchable. Richard stepped closer to the center of the lobby, placing the recorder, the device capturing Cross's confession, in plain view on the reception counter. He didn't need to dramatize, didn't need theatrics. Presence alone commanded attention. "Now that I have your attention," Richard said, eyes locking onto Cross's, "let's discuss how you've been running this place." Cross swallowed, his face pale, hands tightening at his sides. The weight of authority, previously invisible to him, pressed down. For a moment, he opened his mouth to protest, but the calm, steady scrutiny in Richard's eyes stopped him. Anna remained at her station, her posture straight, her gaze lowered slightly. Richard's attention acknowledged her resilience with a brief nod. She had endured quietly, survived with dignity, and now her silent strength was part of the weight that confronted Cross. The other employees shifted, some standing straighter, some clutching papers nervously. Richard's presence transformed the ordinary lobby into a stage of accountability, the air thick with anticipation. Richard allowed a single, controlled pause, letting the gravity of his revelation settle. Cross could no longer hide behind fear. Every word, every action, every cruelty now had consequence. With the employees watching and the recorder in plain view, Richard prepared to play the evidence. The time for confrontation had arrived, and Cross's crimes were about to be exposed in full public clarity. Richard pressed play on the recorder, the soft click echoing in the hushed lobby. Cross's voice filled the space, low at first, then gaining urgency. "Yes, I did what I had to," Cross admitted, each word deliberate. "The janitor saw something she shouldn't have. I couldn't let it go. I made her pay just once. She had to learn her place." A shiver ran through the employees. Eyes widened. Some whispered. Others remained frozen in disbelief. Cross's arrogance cracked, disbelief now curdling into fear. Richard let the recording play in full. Cross's own words described the embezzlement, the financial manipulations, and the assault on Anna. Each sentence left no room for doubt or denial. Anna's hands trembled slightly as she rested them on the counter, her bruise now illuminated under the fluorescent light. Tears pooled in her eyes, not from shame, but from the quiet, profound relief of vindication. The clerks, once silent, began to murmur among themselves, their fear replaced by shock and a growing sense of justice. Evelyn, still seated at the edge of the lobby, exhaled softly, leaning on Richard as he stood nearby. Her fragile hand rested on the counter, a silent witness to the turn of events. Cross's face went pale. His lips moved, attempting to deny, to escape, but the recording continued, relentless and absolute. Every lie he might try to tell was now contradicted by his own voice. Richard stepped closer, voice calm but carrying authority. "This is the truth of what has happened here. Every act of cruelty, every financial manipulation, every attempt to intimidate, proven beyond doubt. Cross's hands shook. He glanced around, seeing the faces of employees, the exposed recorder, and Richard's unwavering gaze. His control, built over years of intimidation, had evaporated. At that moment, law enforcement officers entered the lobby, moving efficiently toward Cross. The timing was exact, the plan precise. He realized instantly that his window of escape had closed. Anna exhaled quietly, relief washing over her. For the first time, she was safe. For the first time, the weight of Cross's authority had lifted. Richard watched as officers approached, presenting the evidence and securing Cross. The former manager attempted to resist, but it was futile. His power had been built on fear, and fear had finally betrayed him. The lobby, once tense and oppressive, felt lighter. Eyes turned to Anna and Evelyn. Quiet applause and murmured words of support rippled through the employees. The truth had set them free, and justice had arrived. With Cross removed, the space exhaled collectively. Richard and Anna stood at the center of the liberated lobby, the first steps toward restoring order and dignity complete. Richard stepped aside, observing silently as the arrest unfolded. The recorder was handed to the lead officer, and the folders containing the financial documents followed. Each piece of proof had been accounted for. There was no room for argument. Cross's arrogance evaporated entirely. His shoulders slumped, eyes darting in disbelief. He had built a fortress of fear, but every brick had crumbled under truth. Anna stood near the reception desk, hands folded, tears glistening in her eyes. She had endured the abuse quietly, survived the public humiliation, and now the truth cleared her completely. The bruise beneath her eye, once a mark of fear, was now a symbol of resilience. Employees began to emerge from their stations, expressions shifting from relief to admiration. A few offered quiet words of encouragement to Anna. One by one, the murmurs of support grew. "You've been strong," whispered a clerk. "We knew you could handle it." Evelyn, seated with Richard nearby, reached out and touched Anna's hand. "You've held your dignity," she said softly. Through it all, Cross, cuffed and led toward the exit, attempted one last protest, a feeble claim of misunderstanding, but the officers ignored him. His crimes were indisputable. The assault, the embezzlement, the intimidation, all laid bare for everyone to see. Richard finally approached Anna, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," he said. "Your courage is what exposed him." She exhaled, the tension leaving her body in a slow, trembling wave. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. She had been vindicated, not with loud spectacle, not through vengeance, but through truth and presence. The lobby, once tense and oppressive, now felt lighter. Employees moved more freely, sharing glances and quiet smiles. The atmosphere shifted subtly but profoundly. Fear replaced by trust, intimidation replaced by relief. Richard glanced at Evelyn, then back at Anna. The mission he had undertaken, quiet, methodical, precise, was complete. Justice had been served, and dignity restored. As the officers led Cross away, Richard's eyes swept the room, noting the change. The employee's posture had shifted. Hope was visible in small gestures, a straightened tie, a calm exchange of words, a relieved smile. The immediate threat was gone. The oppressive presence that had ruled the lobby for months had been removed. Order returned, and the first seeds of trust and confidence had been planted anew. With Cross escorted from the building and the evidence secured, Richard now turned to ensuring the legacy of the company, and Anna's place within it, would endure. Richard approached her slowly, hands clasped behind his back, expression calm and measured. "Anna," he said softly, "what you've shown these past weeks, your strength, your dignity under pressure, it's remarkable. You've earned more than survival. You've earned authority." Anna looked at him, uncertain. "Authority?" she asked quietly, almost a whisper. Richard nodded. "I want you to take his position. Not as a favor, not as charity. You have proven yourself capable. You've led through restraint, through care, and through courage. This role is yours because you've earned it." A ripple of surprise spread across the few remaining employees in the lobby. Some stared openly, others whispered, realizing that the quiet janitor, the one who had endured so much, was now the figure of authority. Anna inhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she processed the weight of the moment. She glanced around at her colleagues. then down at the polished floors that had once felt heavy under Cross's oppressive shadow. Slowly, she nodded. I accept, she said, voice steadying as it passed through the lobby like a quiet promise. Richard allowed a small, approving smile. Start small. Observe, guide, restore confidence. This isn't about asserting power. It's about stewardship. Anna's first act of leadership came immediately. She moved toward a clerk who had been nervous all morning. Your report looks solid, she said, her tone gentle but firm. Let's review it together and see how we can improve it. The clerk exhaled, visibly relieved. Confidence returned in subtle gestures, straightened posture, calmer expressions, quieter smiles. Richard observed from a distance, noting the immediate shift in energy. Leadership, when rooted in integrity and empathy, was contagious. Evelyn approached Anna with a small cup of tea, offering it with a smile. Anna accepted, nodding in thanks. The gesture, simple and human, symbolized the restoration of trust and care within the space. Richard stepped back slightly, watching the interaction. The company was no longer defined by fear. It was defined by presence, by integrity, and by the quiet strength of those who had endured. As Anna began to guide her colleagues with careful precision, the transformation of the workplace continued. Richard allowed himself to step back, confident that the future was in capable hands. A week had passed. The lobby now felt lighter, more open. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows, casting patterns on the polished floors that seemed to mirror the calm energy in the space. Anna moved through the room with quiet confidence. Her blonde hair was pulled neatly into a bun, her blouse crisp, and her posture straight. She greeted each employee with a nod or a brief word of encouragement, her presence firm but kind. Mark, who had helped Richard during the investigation, now worked openly at his station, relaxed but attentive. His usual nervous gestures had softened, replaced by a steady focus as he followed Anna's lead. Anna paused by a small supply table where Evelyn was organizing cleaning materials. These shelves look much better, Anna said warmly. Thank you for handling this so carefully. Evelyn smiled softly, a glimmer of relief in her eyes. It's easier now, she replied. You've made it safe? Richard observed from the side, his figure partially obscured near the reception doors. He watched the transformation unfold, the way Anna's steady presence allowed employees to move without hesitation, to speak without fear, to work without tension pressing down on every gesture. Anna glanced down at her hands for a moment. Noticing the bruise beneath her, I had almost disappeared. The faint mark remained only as a subtle reminder of past trials, but her strength and dignity were now unmistakable. A clerk approached, holding a folder. Anna, could you review these projections? She accepted it, offering a small, reassuring smile. Of course. Let's make sure everything is accurate and clear. Her tone was calm, precise, and confident, inspiring trust in the same quiet way she had endured adversity. Later, Anna stopped briefly to watch Mark rearrange a set of client files. She offered a nod of approval. Good work, she said. The gesture was simple, yet it reinforced the sense of shared purpose that had been missing for so long. Richard allowed himself a small, contented sigh. The office, once weighed down by fear and secrecy, now carried a sense of steady order. Integrity and careful leadership had replaced intimidation and uncertainty. Anna paused in the center of the lobby, taking in the transformed atmosphere. She exhaled, a quiet smile touching her lips. The space was alive again, not because of authority enforced through fear, but through empathy, skill, and the quiet resilience she had shown every day. With the environment thriving under her guidance, Richard stepped back further, watching his mission bear fruit. Anna's leadership was no longer tentative, it was fully realized. Richard lingered near the entrance, his figure partly obscured by the tall glass doors. The morning light highlighted the polished floors and the calm energy flowing through the lobby. He watched quietly, a silent observer now rather than a guiding presence. Anna moved with deliberate care, overseeing her team. She checked schedules, guided conversations, and offered quiet affirmations. Each action was precise, purposeful, her leadership emerging naturally from the strength she had shown during the crisis. Mark worked nearby, more relaxed than ever, his earlier fear replaced by respect and confidence. Small gestures, a corrected file, a word of praise, created a rhythm of trust that had been absent for months. Richard's gaze swept across the room, noting the subtle changes, the steady pace of employees, the calm but confident interactions, and the absence of tension that had once hung like a heavy curtain. This was the result of his mission, now fully realized. Anna caught his eye briefly. They exchanged a quiet nod, no words necessary. In that single gesture, Richard recognized the depth of her growth, her capacity to sustain what he had worked to restore. She had not only survived, she had reclaimed the space with dignity and skill. He moved toward a small table near the lobby, where an old photograph of Harborstone's founding hung slightly crooked on the wall. Richard reached up and straightened it, a symbolic act of alignment, of legacy restored. The company was now in hands capable of honoring its history and guiding its future. The employees continued their work, unhurried but focused. Anna's voice carried softly, instructions given with clarity and respect. The oppressive shadow of Cross's mismanagement had vanished entirely, replaced by a presence that fostered integrity, patience, and quiet confidence. Richard allowed himself a brief smile. This was what he had come for, to protect, to witness, and to ensure that the institution he cared for would endure. The immediate danger was gone. The leadership was secure. The lessons of courage, resilience, and truth had been internalized and would continue to guide the company. He stepped back further, blending into the background. The Guardian's role was no longer necessary. His presence was now optional, his mission complete. Anna's leadership, built on strength, empathy, and quiet perseverance, was enough to sustain Harborstone. Richard paused for one last look at the thriving lobby. The sunlight caught the polished surfaces, glinting off the walls and desks. Everything was in order. Everything was right. With the environment stable and Anna fully in command, Richard could finally leave the space with confidence, knowing the legacy of justice, integrity, and quiet strength was secure. Harborstone had returned to life, not through fear, but through the integrity and care of those who now led it. Anna moved through the space with quiet authority, checking schedules, guiding conversations, offering soft words of encouragement. Each gesture was purposeful, deliberate, and infused with the dignity she had earned through months of endurance. Her presence commanded respect without intimidation, proving that true leadership was rooted in character, not control. Employees worked with confidence. Mark filed documents efficiently, a subtle smile marking the ease of his restored trust. Evelyn moved through the supply area, her careful hands arranging tools with precision. Even small actions carried a new weight of dignity, as though each person understood that their contributions mattered, that they were now part of something larger and just. Richard observed from the threshold, blending into the background. He watched Anna interact, guiding without dominance, correcting without condescension, inspiring without spectacle. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His mission was complete. The space he had protected, the people he had safeguarded, and the legacy he had honored were now in capable hands. He stepped toward the center of the lobby, pausing briefly by the reception desk. Anna caught his gaze, and they exchanged a quiet look of mutual respect. Words were unnecessary. Everything that had been lost, silenced, or broken had been restored, not by force, but by truth, resilience, and steadfast presence. Richard's eyes drifted to a small photograph on the wall, the original founders of Harborstone, their faces serious and determined. He straightened the frame with careful hands, a small, symbolic gesture honoring the past while acknowledging the present. Justice, integrity, and quiet strength had carried the company through its darkest days, and now the light of renewed purpose shone clearly. The space seemed to breathe, a soft murmur of conversation, the shuffle of papers, the click of keyboards, all blended into a calm rhythm of productive work. The lessons of courage, endurance, and honesty were etched into every corner, every gesture, and every interaction. Richard took one last step back, his silhouette framed by the sunlight streaming through the windows. The story of justice and reclamation had reached its natural conclusion. The quiet strength of those once overlooked now led Harborstone forward, and the Guardian's role was no longer necessary. In the stillness, one thought remained clear: leadership is not measured by fear imposed, but by character embodied. Even in the darkest circumstances, courage, truth, and integrity can prevail, shaping a lasting legacy for those who endure. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.